Hey Sunspace Sun, I'm Daisy Viktoria, and today I'm going to be redrafting my medieval coat hardy pattern. This is also known as a gothic fitted dress or a kirtle. And because I have a tutorial on drafting this dress style, and lots of people have had lots of success and assistance using this tutorial, I thought it might be helpful to go ahead and show you guys some of the drafting process as I redraft with you today. So that way, if you're using this tutorial, you could actually use this video to help you kind of troubleshoot some of the steps maybe. Now, I already have a pattern for this dress style drafted, so why am I redrafting? I would like to make a new dress of this style and many more in the future. And my pattern, though it's pretty well fitted for me, over the years our bodies tend to change a little bit. I mean, even within 1 year it could change. So what I aim to do is to basically make a more perfectly fitted to me now version of the pattern. And instead of just adjusting what I have, I thought I'll start from scratch so I can illustrate to you guys some of the tricks going through this drafting process. Now, when you draft this dress, you're going to need, well, my tutorial. If you're following along, you'll need a tape measure, something to write with, preferably a friend to help you measure, but you could maybe do it yourself. And you need some sort of material to draft on, so you can draft on paper. Keep in mind you are going to have to put together a mock-up of the dress, so if you want to go ahead and draft onto muslin, that's fine. I'm using an old bed sheet that I got for a couple bucks at a thrift store. Those work great. I love using old bed sheets to draft and do mock-ups. And I'm going to draft directly onto the fabric. You can do that, or you can draft onto paper. Either is fine. So let's take a look at this tutorial. Okay, so I've printed this in black and white just at the library, but it is available in full color. So it's very illustrative. And if you want to read through all of this, there is going to be a lot of information in here on like an intro to the style, how it kind of appears historically, some pictures. Sometimes you see this style with lacing, sometimes with buttons, short sleeves, long sleeves, all sorts of different necklines and variations, because I'm giving you sort of a basic drafting block here, dress block. Okay, so you can use all different fabrics for this dress. Your choice of materials depends whether you're doing something historical, something fantasy, whatever it is that you're interested in. You know, you can read through all of this. Period fabrics are going to include wools, linens. There are hemp fabrics, silks, brocades, all kinds of options depending on what specific time era, what location, what class you're going for. And if it's fantasy, you know, you've got even more options. So you can calculate here the approximate amount of fabric that you need just by measuring your shoulder to floor, your waist to floor, and then shoulder to waist. And then I have a quick little formula here for you. For reference, it usually takes me around 5 yards if I want a long sleeve dress, and I'm about 5'4"-ish. I have notes on personalization. Again, this is find your joy. What do you want to do with it? So a note on drafting is that you're going to need a seam allowance. Now, I like to use about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You can use whatever amount of seam allowance you like, but you just need to know what it is. So your measurements, I'm not going to illustrate completely how to take all of them because I do have another video illustrating how to measure, but I am going to give you a few tips here. So we're going to go through these. A note on taking measurements for this style of dress as well is, do you want the dress to be supportive or do you want it to be more of a loose fit? That's going to determine what undergarments you're wearing, because whatever undergarments you're wearing to measure is what you're drafting to. So if you want the dress to be a loose fit and just wear your regular bra underneath it, just put on your regular bra to draft. If you want this dress to be supportive, that is something that a lot of reenactors and Ren Faire people and SCA members and like all these people like to kind of go for. So I would like to note that if you are looking to do a supportive dress, you are probably going to have to fit a mock-up and alter a couple of things. It is extremely rare to get a supportive dress just right out of the gate. If you do, that is super lucky. So one thing you can do though to make it closer to what you're gonna need in the end is don't wear your regular bra. So this dress, if it's supportive, is going to work more like a sports bra. So it's gonna like, you know, smush together as it supports, right? So I've put on a sports bra here, and it doesn't matter if the sports bra is a perfect fit or not. You're, again, gonna have some adjustments to make, but you want one that's approximating this fit. So that's just one tip to help you out. Okay, so first you're gonna need shoulder to hem and waist to hem. These are gonna be measured by taking your tape measure from your shoulder or from your waist, whichever one you're on, and measuring to the floor or wherever you want the hem of your dress to be. I usually like to draft my pattern to about the longer length that I like because it's much easier to go ahead and shorten it later. Alternately, you can draft your pattern just to the hip and then just extend that length every time you cut it out of fabric, totally up to you. For me, it's a little bit faster when I want to just pump out a new dress to have it drafted all the way to the length because I can just like set my pattern on the fabric and then just cut, 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 go, I'm done. So go ahead and measure those and note that on your measurements. I'm measuring in inches because I'm a weird American. You can measure in inches or centimeters, whatever you like. One thing I like to do when I'm measuring by myself to get heights is I like to step on the end of my tape measure, and I just make sure I step so that I know, like here I've got 2 inches bent, and that way I just know to subtract 2 from whatever I measure. Okay, so some of these measurements are going to be pretty self-explanatory. Some might be a little bit more tricky, so we're just going to go through them. Okay, so you need to go shoulder to shoulder. I like to go about where shoulder rotates here. It could be different in the front and the back, so check that too. For now, we're not going to be worried too much about very specific differences front to back because that's something you can kind of adjust as you fit. So as long as you're pretty close, good. The armscye, this is a really tough one to measure because it's not like an exact part of your body. It's going to be the arm opening of the dress. So you basically just kind of do this thing and see about what looks right to you. Now the bust, probably one of the more self-explanatory parts. Measure around the fullest part of your bust, and this is with your sports bra on. So this may or may not be the same measurement as with your regular bra. Okay, so I've split this into front bust and back bust. If you have someone helping you, it's really easy to measure front and back with their help. Otherwise, what I like to do as a shortcut by myself is just measure the front. So that's going to be armpit to armpit. And what I find is that my front bust is a little bit larger than my back. So I can get the back by just subtracting that from the full measurement, right? Because front plus back equals the full way around. Next, we want to measure our under bust. And we want to measure our waist. Now, if you don't know exactly where your waist is, it's the smallest part, and you can find that by bending. And when you bend, you will bend at the waist. So where's my waist? Oh, it's right here. And you want a hip measurement. So the hip measurement is honestly the least important in this dress because the skirt flares. It's just kind of a make absolutely sure we're clearing the hip sort of deal. And what you want to do is measure the fullest part. Now we have a few distances to measure. So we want our shoulder to bust. And I like to measure kind of here at the side-ish, because we're measuring down ways. And we're going to end up with a curve. So we are going to address this curvature. So right now, just measure straight down. We want bust to under bust. So what I like to do is just keep going, so I make sure I don't like add extra amounts on or something weird. And then under bust to waist, and then waist to low hip. So that's really your measurements. There is another page here which has sleeve measurements, so I'm gonna go ahead and show you that. So we're just gonna do all the measurements together. So on the sleeves, we have the arm side, which you already measured for the dress. You're gonna need your bicep. Now, if you have an arm that's bigger than the other, make sure you measure that one. And you wanna measure your elbow and your wrist. Now elbow, if you bend it, may be a little bit bigger, so you want to make sure you measure that, because you do want your sleeve to clear like when you bend your arm as well. And you want to measure your wrist. Okay, next you want to measure your arm length. So just from your shoulder down to your wrist. Now if you bend your arm, you may have a longer arm length, so it's a good idea to check that as well. Now your underarm length is just underneath the arm, so easy peasy. And then we have a couple of distances, so shoulder to bicep and wrist to elbow. Now I didn't write on there bicep to elbow. You can measure that as well, but it's going to be taken care of just inherently because we have the arm length and the other lengths. Okay, so we've got measurements. Now the next part is going to be transferring from your body measurements to the measurements you're actually using in your pattern. And these are all outlined here in the tutorial. It's just a little bit of math. So shoulder to hem, you want to add your seam allowance because you're going to have a shoulder seam. So I would add a 1/2 inch to that. And then I have to add 1 inch, and that's because your most basic hem is going to be like fold under 1/2 inch and fold under another 1/2 inch. If you decide you want to do a different hem amount, then that 1 inch could be replaced by whatever you want to do for your different hem. So then on waist to hem, you're not adding seam allowance because it's just a distance part of the dress, not like a seam. So you're just adding your hem to that. Shoulder to shoulder, you're going to divide by 2 because we're drafting this in halves of the body. And then you're going to add your seam allowance. So mine was 14 divided by 2 is 7. My seam allowance is 1/2, so that's going to be 7.5. And that's in inches. My arm side, I'm also going to divide by 2 because I'm going to have a front piece and a back piece. And then I'm going to add to that twice my seam allowance. So my arm side, I measured out 20, so 1/2 of that is 10. And then I'm going to add twice the seam allowance, which is twice of 1/2 is 1. So I will have 11. And we're going to just keep doing this. So front bust divided by 2, and then plus twice the seam allowance. And then back bust divided by 2, and plus twice the seam allowance. When we get to the under bust, waist, and hip, we're dividing by 4, and that's because we have the full measurement, whereas for the bust, we had the front and the back separated. So the full waist measurement divided by 4 will give you 1/4, or like 1/2 of the front versus 1/2 of the back, and so on. And then shoulder to bust, you're just going to take that measurement, add your seam allowance because you'll have a shoulder seam, and the rest of the distances are just kept as they are. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of give you some pointers, some tips on the sleeve while we're at it. So the sleeves are a couple pages past this in the tutorial. So you're going to take your arm side and then you're going to add double the seam allowance. You're going to take your bicep and add double the seam allowance, and that's because on the sleeve there's a seam on each side of the sleeve. So bicep, elbow, and wrist are all just the measurement plus twice the seam allowance. And then your arm length, you're gonna add the seam allowance for the shoulder seam, plus I've put down 1 inch for hem. Again, if you have a different hem amount, you can add a different amount. And then the underarm, same thing. And then shoulder to bicep and wrist to elbow are simply lengths that we're going to use. And that's all the prep work for getting ready to actually draft onto our drafting material, which in this case for me is an old sheet. All right, so I'm working at the edge of my fabric here, and we're just gonna turn to the front diagram here, and we're gonna start transferring our measurements onto the fabric. Now, for a lot of people, it is easiest to just start with the length, so you get that out of the way. Now, you'll notice most of the fitting is up in the torso region, and the skirt is free flowing. So we're really concentrating on that torso area, so the dress will be fitted, giving us that great medieval silhouette. So we're basically just transferring these right onto the fabric. So A was our total length. So all of these letters that I have in the tutorial here in the diagram correspond to the letters on the Your Measurements page, where we converted the measurements to the pattern measurements. I'm gonna measure my length and go off screen a bit since it is pretty long, and we're gonna focus on the top part. So another thing that might be easy to start with is that C measurement, giving you across the shoulders. And then some of the base lengths, like J goes from the shoulder down to the bust, K goes from bust to underbust, L goes from underbust to waist, and M from waist to hip. So if you go ahead and transfer those on, that takes care of that. So it's most helpful if you have a yardstick or something flat you can draw, and I will get mine. If you want to measure on the other side too, like sometimes it helps to measure out those distances again. That way you've got something you can draw a nice straight line with. Yeah, we're slightly off there. So let me redraw that line. Hopefully this shows you too that if you're slightly off, it's very easy to correct it. Okay, so now we're gonna get our lengths here. So, as you can see, the bust is probably the easiest one to start with. Now you're not taking your actual bust measurement, you're taking the one that you measured from the pattern. So E, I'm gonna mark where that's at, and then the under bust, and then the waist, we're gonna mark at the waistline, and then the hip, we're gonna mark at the hip line. And again, that's just gonna make sure it totally clears the hip. Okay, so that's kind of your first basic curve right there. What we're gonna do, however, is take into account the fact that we might want to curve in a little bit. So if you're just gonna connect these and have a perfectly straight front seam, there we go, boom. What I like to do is curve the bust. Like after the under bust, I like to curve it in just a little bit. And I've recommended in here about, 1/2 to 2 inches or so. Like it kind of depends on how big of a difference you have between your bust and waist. And there's not really a rule on how to do this, but a lot of the medieval portraits have that sort of curved in look there at the belly, and this gives you that. So if you do that, then you're going to want to remeasure your waist here and make sure that you still have the right amount. And when I do that, what happens is that I end up with a much more simple curve there. So it's like not as drastic of a curve inward, which helps a lot. And then up here, this is where there's a little bit of zhuzhing going on. Your shoulder measurement, so you're going to want the shoulder of your dress to end there. And your arm size, you know, we measured, mine was 10, so I'm going to draw about 10 inches. It's going to potentially be adjusted as you sew, you know, depending what you find you need when you fit your first mock-up. And then at the neckline here, you can draw it however you want. You may adjust that as you fit it. And typically I end up curving in a little bit at the top there as well. And from here, it's pretty easy to get the skirt because you just extend. This is the part that's the hardest for most of the people I have worked with. On the back, it's going to be the same kind of deal. You're just going to be using your back measurements. So this is going to be slightly different, and I'll show you that in just a moment. What I want to do first is show you how this is different from the pattern that I've been using. So let's take a look. So pattern that I've been using for a long time is actually longer waisted. So the waist is too low, and that's something that's been affecting me quite a bit in the fit of the dresses. So bringing that waist up, I think, is going to help a lot. It's also a little bit small, this dress. And so I'm drafting, as you can see, a little bit bigger here. And I think that's going to help a lot too, because you can always take things in. It's much harder to take them out when the fabric does not exist, right? So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out, and then we'll do the back. Okay, now for fitting purposes, I am just fitting the torso down to my hips. So I have just cut out that much, and I'm going to also do the back just that much, and then I'm going to fit those. And when I do my mock-up, then I'm gonna extend all the way down after I'm pleased with the fit of the torso. So what I like to do sometimes for the back is trace the front or lay the front down as like a starting point, because like, look, I've already measured the waist point. I've already measured the underbust and the bust point. Like, hello, easy peasy. Lemon squeezy. And the arm side, I can just trace that out as well. Now, there's going to be a few things different in the back. I'm just going to go ahead and trace out the front so I can remove it and show you guys what I'm doing. The back underbust is the same, but the back bust is a little bit smaller. I'll go ahead and bring that in a little bit there. And then the back is going to want to be higher up here, probably, than the front. Now, we all have some sort of a back curvature, so typically this is going to go in slightly from that back seam. And what I always suggest is that you fit this to make it perfect, because that's much easier and faster than trying to like measure and remeasure until you think you've got it perfect. So just a little way to make it easier for you. That looks like I went in quite a lot, so maybe like here-ish. And at the back, you do end up dipping in at the waist a little bit too, but you don't need it to be as dramatic as the front, and that's because your spine curves in there, like at the small of your back. And it actually will curve a little below the waist too. So it's pretty easy to go from front to back. Okay, excellent. And then for the one more thing that we're drafting here is the sleeve. So turn your books to the sleeve page. And then here, we are going to just draw out our measurements. So There are 2 sleeve patterns in here, and that's because you can do a sleeve with an underarm seam, which is totally fine, or you can do a sleeve with the seam back here. And this one is what I like best for long sleeves, especially when they have buttons. So the buttons will appear back here instead of under here. If you're doing short sleeves, it doesn't really matter. So we want our lengths. So, okay, it helps to kind of start with the R and S lengths so we have those to work with. I'm going to go ahead and draft out that S curve sleeve because that's the one I like the best, and I know that it's easier to translate it into the other one. Okay, so I need 20.5 and 24.5. Not quite a straight line, that's fine. We can make it straight with the yardstick. So down here we're going to end up with the wrist. Da, da, da. So the measurement from the wrist to the elbow is going to go here. And we also have from the shoulder to the bicep. So that's where those lines are going to end up. So elbow and bicep. Okay. Now, I like my sleeves to be bigger than my arm, but if you want it to be exactly your arm size, you know, that's what we actually calculated here in our pattern measurements. We're going to start there and then we can just make it bigger if we want to. Okay, wrist plus 2 times seam allowance. I want 12 and I want 12 and then I want 21 up here. Okay, so my elbow was 12 and this was also 12, so and then arm side is going to be a curvy line. So, you know, in your best artistic curvy line drawing, just sketch that out there. You will want these two to match up, you know, the 2 sides. So as you can see here, just going out from where I need the arm's eye to be, it's much bigger than my bicep. So if I wanted it to be tightly fitted, I would need to come in very sharply, right? Like this. I don't prefer that. I actually prefer it to be, you know, on the wider side at the top and then more fitted toward the bottom. So there you go, there's your sleeve. Okay, so now we are fitting the mock-up. I have just sewn the top portion to the hip. The sleeve, fun story here. The sleeve I drew out was almost exactly the sleeve pattern I have that I really like. But I'm just going to tell you guys how to fit the sleeve. You just sew that seam together there and slip your arm in. See if you like it. You know, if it's too tight or too loose, you might want to adjust it. If you like it, you're good to go. So this is what we really want to test the fit of. So it's going to be a little hard to test the fit with the mic. Let's set that down. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just pin it closed here at the front because I intend to have either a lacing front or buttons. If I have buttons, I'm going to want to add overlap for the buttons. So it seems pretty good down to the hips. That is exactly what we want. So now let's look here, use the mirror. So the front fit is okay, mostly. We do have a little bit of this going on, and I'll show you how you can flatten that out if you want to. You don't have to. It's totally up to you, but we're going to actually do that trick. It's a really, really cool trick. So first I'm going to look at the back, and my back is out way too far. So one thing I want to address in this particular pattern is I tend to bring my shoulders forward a lot, and so my previous pattern is drafted that way, and if I stand with my shoulders more back where they go, notice it shortens the back there. So from this to this is all a draping thing because this is posture. So though you drafted the pattern initially, those little tweaks come in draping your mock-up, and that's where you can go from a pretty decent fit, like still probably better than a mass-produced pattern, to a perfect fit. Now this would really help if you have a friend to help you, but I'm gonna go ahead and do my best. So I know that needs to come in about there, and then the top kind of too. And then the small of my back seems to be pretty okay. And then a gore is going to be placed in right here, so that's going to flow freely out. Okay, so let's try making an adjustment. So what's happening here is I'm taking out most of that back curvature. So it all depends on your back shape and your back posture. So there's no like one right way to curve the back. You just try your best, fit it, and make any adjustments. So my back seam is ending up fairly straight, actually, like a lot straighter than I would have thought. I'm actually questioning why I don't have more going in here. Let's try it on. Okay, and then I don't really have to pin all the way down to the hips because I'm going to set my gores here. Remember, we measured from waist to floor. That's where the gores are going to go. So just tends to look nicer if the dress clears your hips even without the gores set in, just from experience. That's kind of what I've come to. So checking that back again, and I could pinch in a little bit right here if I want to get like an absolutely perfect fit, but then see if I put my shoulders back, I've got too much fabric all over back there, and that's what I want to push myself to do, is to have better, straighter posture. So I'm going to take that in there, and I'm going to take this in up near the top as well. So let's try that. Much, much easier to adjust the back if you have a friend to help you. But if you don't, it still is possible. I think where I'm at right now is probably going to be good enough. Okay, so taking a look there, that honestly looks pretty good. I'm pleased with that. Now look at this. That happens to a lot of us, and there's an easy way to fix it. So I am just going to pin. So in a lot of modern garments, there will be a dart there. Okay, we're going to note that. And then we're going to actually just make that change on our pattern flat. I'll show you. All right, back to the drafting table or the drafting floor. One thing I want to do is, since I adjusted the back so much, I want to make sure that I maintain my seam allowance on my pieces. So I'm cutting the excess, but leaving a 1/2 inch because that's my seam allowance from where I made the new seam line. Because what we're going to do now is rip this all apart And then I'm going to show you how to adjust this on your pattern piece. Now these are not going to be my final pattern pieces. I am going to redraw them out prettier. So I don't really care if I get a lot of like punchy holes and stuff in them. That's totally fine for me. Okay, and technically I only need one of each, one front and one back piece to make my final pattern, right? So this is going to be my back piece pattern, except I'm going to extend the skirt longer. And then this is going to be my front piece pattern, sort of, okay? So see how I pinned that there? Now, it's not perfect, but notice how this has basically pulled this over. So without it, and then pulled over, right? So if I just take these pins out for a moment, without is up here, and with, it shifts this piece over. So I'm simply going to redraw it that way. Now sometimes doing that, as you can see, it kind of like bubbles here because it is going over the bust. So a way that you can kind of make up for that is bring this out just a little bit more here to give you a little more of that back, but then that will smooth this out for you. So with this pinned in here, that is how we're going to make that perfect. Now this little trick here is not in the tutorial. This is an extra little tip that you get for watching the video. Haha. I think I want to bring my neckline just slightly higher than where I had it. Okay, so that is our front pattern piece now after a basic fitting of it. And what I can do for the skirt is every fabric I can just go like that down to the edge of the fabric. If I want to go ahead and make the pattern piece, just trace it on out and there you go. And then for the back, I'm going to also retrace my back pattern piece just to make it a little bit nicer looking, and I'm going to cut that out. And I've already cut my sleeves, so I'll show you what those look like. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to show you what I mean by just extending the skirt out. So I've basically cut a hem here, which I'm pretending I have a certain fabric width, and this would be the edge of my fabric. So here where I've got this line, I'm going to just connect that so that it goes up into the waist. And as you can see, it's going to pass where that hip is. So it's fine, like we don't actually need this hip cut in here. We're going to go out, but depending your fabric width, you're making sure that it always passes by that hip. Like you can't make it smaller. You have to make it at least that big. So awesome. I'll cut these out and then show you what my finished pieces look like so you have a reference. Okay, so here are my pieces. And as you can see, the front has that angle that I did to get rid of that underarm floof. And there is my sleeve. So your pattern pieces should look something similar to that. And then the gores will be triangles that we will cut separately and put in when we make the dress, which you can watch many of my sewing videos to see me do that. Okay, so one last note here is that since I did this little adjustment today where I, you know, fixed that little ripple in the bodice by the armpit, I'm going to go ahead and take some photos of that, and I'm going to add a page into the tutorial. So if you are getting the tutorial, I will add that in there. So it's kind of hard to put that as just a little, here's exactly how to do it, because it's going to depend on your body. And in fact, I've had plenty of versions of this pattern where I haven't done that and it's been totally fine. So I'm gonna add that as a note in there, like something you can try and you can watch me do it in the video. And so that is how you draft this pattern. This is not a sewing video, this is just tips on using my tutorial to draft. The tutorial does have the entire step-by-step sewing process included in it. However, since I already have a video showing you how to do that, and I also have more videos where I make more of this dress, I'm not going to focus on that right now. However, I am going to use this pattern to make a new dress, a party colored velvet coat hardy, which I'm super excited about. So I will be filming that, and you can see in that video a little bit of tips on how I put this together using the pattern. So, alright, I hope that helps you get through the pattern drafting tutorial. I hope it gives you just a few little tips and tricks. If you were stuck on a little part, I hope this helps you get through it. And if you would like to get the tutorial and follow along with it, please go for it. Alright, find me on all the social medias as Daisy Viktoria. My website is daisyviktoria.com, and thank you so much to my patrons who help me to make videos, and particularly this video. Thank you to everyone who is purchasing and using my tutorial, because that actually helps me specifically in this one. So, you know, either way, happy to have you guys, and good luck with your projects, and I'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye!